Sometimes it's hard to find joy in a current reality that tells you there's no hope. My guest today is Simon Sharkey Clark. In late 2001, Simon's life imploded and his rapid journey downward began. Through divorce, he lost his wife, his kids, his house, and then he lost himself. He was drunk 7 nights a week, and he viewed the world through booze and a cocktail of prescription medication. In August 2006, he convinced himself that he had failed at everything in life. He climbed into his work van and drove himself at speed into a telegraph pole. His injuries from that incident were so severe he spent 12 weeks in hospital. But whilst in that hospital, he designed and initiated the biggest shift of all. Alrighty. Simon, those years from 2001 through to 2006 certainly can't have been the happiest years of your life. However, fast forward to now, and you're calling yourself a shift initiator.
Yeah.
What is that?
So as part of what I went through and what I discovered, it requires that if we want massive amounts of change, it's really hard to shift away from what we've done for so often and for so long, and quite often repeatedly, that it becomes habit forming. And so it's all about just starting one tiny little shift. And that's it started as a bit of a catchy title, the shift initiator, but then I realized that the moment I started to speak it, I thought, well, I actually live that. And it's part of the reason of why I do what I do. So I walked into that name and it stayed with me. And I believe that if we really want to start something wrong, we've just got to shift things a little, and then shift a few more things a little about what we do. And it's just these tiny little things that we can say, yep, I'll just change this, and then I'll just change this. Rather than look at something that's so far off in the distance that it's a great idea and we get excited about it, but as soon as we do that, we feel a little bit of self-doubt creeping in.
Yep.
That great idea and that big goal just looks almost impossible. And I say do the reverse. Just start shifting now, just in tiny little stages, but shift towards that goal.
Yeah. I remember back in the early 2000s, I had a coach for a time, and one of the things she used to say to me, Pat, when you shift, everything will shift.
Yeah.
And it's so true. And it's moment by moment.
Yeah.
And, initially you mightn't see a huge improvement, if that's the best word. But then passage of time, and you start to see, and what you're perceiving out here is looking very, very different.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, there's a couple of different mantras that I've picked up in life and learning by my own trials and tribulations. And one of the things that I often repeat to myself and also repeat to clients as well is, it's a little saying, if who you are is what you do, then what you change will change you. And that's part of the shifting mentality that I like to encourage people to challenge themselves on and learn to enjoy, that it isn't as hard as what we make out, because we're constantly looking at this huge end result. It's if we just start to change at the beginning in tiny little ways, that's when things can really improve for us.
Mm-hmm. So was there an actual turning point for you to step into this work?
Into this, there was a couple actually. There was probably 3. The first one was obviously when I was back in hospital, recovering from my injuries and being extremely lucky to survive. And for all intents and purposes, a lot of psychological and psychiatric advice that I received at the time suggests that, one of two things are going to happen. You're either going to regret that you didn't achieve what you were trying to achieve, or it's going to be a big monumental moment in your life and you'll move in the opposite direction. And that's what I did. So stage one for me was I made myself a really simple promise, and that was I did not want to be the person that I was. I wanted to be the complete opposite. I had no idea what that looked like, but I just started doing tiny little opposite things to what I would do. Instead of saying yes, I would say no. Instead of saying no, I would say yes. And then engage more and look for more professional help and look for services. The second part was when I was working with a really lovely psychologist who was helping me go through the motions of improving where I was at with my own state of mental well-being. And that is that I started to understand how much I was learning and interacting with her and being able to grasp a lot of these concepts that were going on. And being a bit blue collar in my sort of upbringing, I thought, there's a lot of stuff here that I could pass on. And so I got the idea of writing my book back in what was it, 2007. And the impetus came from that. That was when I started to really take note, really pay attention to what was going on. And that was another big shift for me. And then finally, I did some training, some professional training. I worked with some people who were using NLP powers for good and not evil, and working and hanging around some really good coaches and seeing what skills they were using, and just started to learn a lot more about not so much what I'd been through, but what other people's experiences were as well. Just absorbing all of that information until I finally said, yeah, I've got my life experience correlated. I've now got it documented in a book about 10 years of my life history. And then finally I've been educated and I've sought the right sort of training and continue to do so, and interact with people that, yeah, this is where I can really step into this space. I always wanted to be the poster boy for what not to do. So I've built that body of work together, and I've been sharing it for the past 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, awesome. One of the things that, or a quality, I guess, or a characteristic that has been an enduring part of how I've shown up in the world is being good-humoured. Now, that's not being funny. For me, to be good-humoured is about being appropriately responsive or not, and to have the really good listening skills to know the difference, and to know in each encounter, in each conversation, where you can go with that conversation.
Yeah.
And I've just recently been exploring conversational intelligence and looking at social, conversational, and humour intelligence. And I'm really seeing how they're a very big part of building resilience. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Look, I've often seen humour as a place for people to hide, myself included. So, the sort of sad clown, if you will, the funny face on the exterior. So I'm still quite wary of when I meet people that I think are constantly humorous or constantly happy or constantly laughing. Like, my ears just go into a different zone. You spoke about listening. That's exactly what I do. I'm listening for, is there anything happening for that person that then they don't even realize they're saying? But the distinction you're drawing about with being sort of good-humoured, I think that's probably more important than it is to just try and be funny and make light of a situation. I've always used humour as a diffuser when talking to people, but I take a lesson from my dear old dad, who because like I've had this eye for several decades since I was a wee boy, and he always used to say to me whenever I get upset about people calling me names or whatever, he said, "Son, if you can't laugh at yourself, you've got no rights laughing at anybody else." And it's one of those father-son moments from years gone by, and I think that sort of embodies what you're suggesting about being good-humoured. If we're good-humoured about ourselves and we accept our foibles and our failings and just focus on what it is that we do really well, we'll laugh at ourselves more often when we have a little bit of a hiccup or a little bit of a stumble. And we're not laughing at ourselves because we're just trying to hide behind that humour. We're laughing at ourselves because we're good-humoured about what we do. And I think there's a really big distinction between the two.
Yeah, and I think in that there's an acknowledgement of our humanity and our frailty. And
Yeah, most definitely.
to see that and not have it as a heavy weight to carry, but
Yeah,
be able to laugh at that.
yeah.
And not in the way we might laugh at a joke,
No.
but to, I think it was Deepak Chopra wrote a book called Why is God Laughing? And the subtitle for that is Because He Gets the Joke. And so there's that, you know. We can look out at life and not see hope, not see a future. And yet our perception, it's not actually reality.
No, that's very, very true. And I think that's one of the things why I always acknowledge when I used to hide inside humour and when I used to use joking and clowning around as really as a form of smokescreen. And I think it is important. Like, life is not all beer and skittles, and you get to a certain point in it where you either stop fighting that and accept it, because if you don't, then I think you're left with nothing but a sour taste in your mouth. And it would appear that, you talk about perception, it would appear that by that perception, nothing ever goes right for you. And before you know it, you're into the why bother. And then after the why bother comes why me, and you go nowhere. Being good-humoured about things and accepting that there's going to be tough times, you're not laughing them off. You're more like, okay, this is obviously not working. And so whatever your outlet is, you might just want to sit in the corner and have a mope, or as my wife says to me, you just want to go and have a vent and a few dozen swear words and offload. The next thing you're back into it. So that's kind of how I see being good-humoured about life.
And we're here.
What's that cliche? We're here for a good time, not a long time.
Yeah, and you know, I believe we are here to experience it all. And if we can get to a point where we can be so self-aware that we know what we're thinking, we know what we're feeling, and we're able to move and adjust and be flexible, then we have a much better chance of achieving some level of equanimity and not experience so many peaks and troughs, and you know, be more able to flow. I talk
and try to avoid fighting yourself at those times when that happens as well. You know, there's nothing worse than saying, "Oh, here I go again. I wish I could stop myself. What am I doing?" Like, you know, the approach that I encourage a lot of people who ask me how to handle those types of situations is to say, well, why don't you just be honest and say, oh, look, I'm doing it again. I need to just slow down and maybe try not to do that again.
Yeah. I've always believed that everyone has a sense of humour, but not everyone has a sense for humour. You know, and some people have a very keen sense, and perhaps they become our more comic characters. They become the comedians, the comic authors, cartoonists. You know, they find some area of expression through that. And, you know, political jokes and cartoons, just one example that comes to mind. And, you know, I remember when the earthquakes in New Zealand happened. You know, it was a time of great loss and great trauma. But about 12 months later, there were all these jokes about Christchurch, and I can't remember them all, but you know, you're living in Christchurch when, and then all these one-liners around earthquake, you know, trauma. But it came from Christchurch, you know. So, and when you're the ones in the trauma Whereas if someone external is doing it, it can be perceived as intrusive and even wounding, you know, so being cautious around that. I saw with great interest that you are an MBIT coach,
Yeah, that's right.
practicing the M-braining model. What
Yeah.
made you choose that methodology?
It was a few years ago that I was looking to do an NLP certification. And as is the case with NLP, there are so many different tracks and so many different paths that you can take. And lucky enough, a good friend at the time had said to me, look, there's a couple of guys here that have been rolling around the NLP space, and they've come up with something that they've been working on for years, which is a heck of a lot more based on what you like, Simon. You like sort of evidentiary type programs and type methodologies, which is quite true. I'm all for existential theories, but when it comes to putting something into practice, I'm a great believer that if there's evidence and a little bit of science to back it up, then the art of having to convince somebody is greatly removed, and that's why I like MBIT so much, because there is no need to convince. It's based on solid scientific theory for a start. The world is only now catching up with the multiple neural networks inside bodies. Plenty of scientists out there trying to debunk it with a petri dish and a microscope have turned around and said, "Oh no, actually this is fair dinkum and this is true." Yeah, it has the capacity for rational thought. So, gee, what do you know? But I really do enjoy MBIT when I practice it with clients and with people, when I decomplicate it. And for those who don't know it, they do a little bit of research on it, but it's basically the incorporation of our three neural networks, our three brains, the head, the heart, and the gut. And the more that I practice it, and the more that I learn about it, the more that you see people, when they're in that mode, for what particular intelligence is actually driving their thought processes. It makes coaching people a lot easier, because I get to sit back and listen and watch and learn and discover in a much shorter time frame what it is that they're trying to communicate to me, and what it is that they're trying to seek assistance with. And it takes a lot of the mystery out of and a lot of the hocus pocus out of it, and just working with something that has a real basis for what's the word I'm looking for? It really does exist, and the proof is in the pudding, because it's not just a matter of twisting words around to give it a positive spin. You can just do so much more that's builds resilience, that gives people their character and their fire back, and in a lot of cases allows people to actually go, you know what, I can do this. I can make a change. I can make a shift, and I've just lost all idea as to why I thought I couldn't.
Yeah. I've done M-braining myself, and I just love, number one, as you mentioned, the increased speed with which you get access. What you might have taken a couple of 2 or 3 sessions in the past now can be encompassed in the first session. And you also, you know, I just invariably see in that first session, and again, it's about the keen listening and the good, the good face-to-face, being able to see what's missing. For a lot of people, for example, they're lacking the courage, and you'll see that, you know, when you visit the gut brain, that it's dead. There's nothing there. And, you know, they're not getting any feeling or sensing in there. So, you know, to be able to lead people to that reawakening is just awesome. You obviously...
letting them lead themselves too. You know, you're able to point things out that they can agree or disagree with. But I've just found that I think one of the biggest mistakes that any coach will make, whether they're business coach, life coach, or whatever label they want to give themselves, I think the biggest mistake they make is putting the words into people's heads without asking permission. And that to me is where it's sort of the hocus pocus. I think with what you and I have studied and what we put into practice, it actually comes out of the person first and foremost, and we can just go back to them and say, okay, so I've got a sense about this and A, B, C. How's that sit for you? Yep, that makes sense to me. All right, cool. We're on the right path. And that's how we just get to move to places faster.
Yeah, yeah. And it lets you create a really high trust environment very quickly. And,
very true.
And so does humour. Humour can create that in an instant. And it's got a two-pronged thing. You can't have humour unless there's some level of trust, because most people won't engage if they're not feeling that the environment is safe. And that's especially so in the workplace. And a lot of people will, when they see that things are safe, well, then there's more room for self-expression.
Yeah, and I guess humour would allow you to build rapport a lot faster too, particularly when the humour's connected to what's going on in the situation.
Yeah, yeah. I love watching growing and developing relationships, and it's a bit like a tennis match, the ball going backwards and forwards, and people in good rapport and witty remarks. Just awesome. It's a real dance, and it's a pleasure for both. It's like a game.
I'm sort of laughing because I'm recalling some of the conversations that I have with my close mates, and I think if people were watching those on the outside, they would see all of this humour and all of this mockery, and they would probably think that whether or not they should actually build a relationship with the rest of us. But no, we're taking ourselves in as little seriousness as we possibly could when those sorts of things are going on.
Yeah. You obviously really enjoy your speaking and facilitating. And I wanted to ask you, one of the things we discussed, or I was going to ask was, when do the lights come on from you? But I guess what I really want to know is, what are your peak moments when you're presenting?
Well, the first peak I have is about 5 or 10 minutes before I actually start presenting, because I'm absolutely filling my britches. I'm quite a nervous speaker, extremely nervous. So I'll rehearse and I'll rehearse and I'll rehearse, and then 5 or 10 minutes before it, the throat dries up and everything goes wrong, and I end up going and I end up presenting, and I think about 5 to 10 minutes into most of my presentations, I realise slow down. And I'm actually out there in either a small group of people or a large group of people, or as will be happening soon, 450 people. That's when I realise that it's important for me to be there and deliver something that I know is of real value, and that people can walk away from going, yeah, he had something in what he was delivering to me that just nailed it. And then lastly, it's always afterwards when I've finished the presentation, or I've finished a workshop, or finished doing a keynote, when somebody will take their time, but they will eventually come up to me and say, hey, I just wanted to say thanks for this or thanks for that. And they'll interact with me, and they'll give me a piece of themselves, which I was not expecting. And I think sometimes I've felt more grateful in those moments, listening to somebody just tell me a pretty sort of deep down type secret from them, and having felt enough from what some guy on a stage just said to be able to bring that. That privilege is never lost on me. Yeah. And that's a big highlight. It's a huge highlight. When I started this, when I was writing my book, I thought, if it just saves one person from even attempting to try and do what I did, if they read my book or they give it to a friend who says, you really need to read this, that would be my moment. That would be enough reason for anything. It wasn't about dollars. It wasn't about advertising or reach or how many people. It was just that one person moment. And I said from that, whatever happens past that point, I will treat as the cream. And that's really how I look at all of my speaking, my presentations and my workshops as well.
Do you have a long-term vision or a legacy you'd like to leave?
I do, and that is that I'm really passionate about improving the state of mental wellbeing for employees and managers in workplaces. I want to be able to leave behind a book or a set of books that pretty much document how we're able to communicate more and talk more. I'm 50 years old. I grew up in the age of where I was a manager far too young at 18. So learning the hard way how to work with people and how to get the best from people, and also how to be a better version of yourself. It's really quite a privilege to be able to see so many of those practices that were drummed into me as a 20-something and a 30-something. They're all starting to come to the fore now. We've got so many people that even when they're in small businesses or solo businesses, they're really tuned into not necessarily what other people are feeling or how they're reacting, but they're really tuned into this idea of people matter. It's not the profits. It's not the business model. It's not how much we're turning over. The whole Richard Branson theory of look after your people and everything else will take care of itself is really starting to hit its strides now. So that's my long-term legacy, is to be able to document that along the way and leave a bunch of people that share that thought for the next generation of those in business or solopreneurs or entrepreneurs or more to the point, just people who really want to work hard for a company that gives a damn.
Yes. As we come to a close now, Simon, what's the easiest way for people to connect with you, and how can they find your book?
Oh, the easiest way. So connect with me on Facebook. There's a Facebook page called Shift Your View, or you can send me a personal friend request as well through Simon Sharkey Clark. Sharky's a nickname I've had for ages. But my book's really easy. I give away a free ebook copy, or if you want to pay the postage, who are we paying at the moment? I think we're paying Officeworks. I'll send the book out for free, and you pay the freight, and that's okay. So you can do that through thebook.shiftyourview.com.au. So there's 3 easy ways to get a hold of me.
Lovely, and we'll put that up on the closing titles. Simon, thank you so much. It's been a real joy getting to know you these last few months since we first met, and look forward to talking again.
No, thank you very much for the invitation. Take care, everybody. Bye.